Settle in. Get comfortable. Sometimes the bravest thing a person does isn't the thing they fight. It's the thing they finally say out loud. Chapter 1. The Seventh Decree. The parchment arrived at 6:30 in the morning, which meant he'd been up since at least 4. Eliza held it at arm's length, not because she couldn't read his handwriting. She could read his handwriting in the dark, blindfolded, underwater, but because the baby had shifted in the night and was now sitting directly on her bladder, and she needed a moment to decide whether to deal with the parchment or the bladder first. The bladder won. It always won these days. When she came back, the parchment was still there on the floor where it had been slid under the door. Official seal, council letterhead, the handwriting of a man who ruled 9 territories and couldn't manage to sleep past 3 in the morning. By royal decree of the Alpha King. The Queen is hereby prohibited from exposure to ambient weather conditions below 62 degrees, including but not limited to open windows during evening hours, courtyards after sunset, balconies during overcast mornings, and gardens when ground frost has been reported within a 40-mile radius. Eliza read it twice. She turned it over to check if there was more. There was. He'd added a footnote. This decree supersedes the informal weather guidelines issued verbally on the 14th. Those guidelines lacked sufficient specificity. Ridiculous, said Brittany. Eliza set the decree on her desk next to the other 6. They made a tidy stack now. She'd started organizing them chronologically after the 4th one, because at that point it had stopped being annoying and started being a filing problem, and Eliza did not tolerate disorganized filing problems. Decree 1 had arrived in her 4th month. Stairs. No stairs without a banister and a companion. She'd filed a formal objection within the hour, citing the architectural survey of the palace, which confirmed that 93% of the staircases had banisters, and questioning the jurisdictional basis for regulating the remaining 7%, which were service stairs and therefore fell under the household steward's authority, not the Crown's. He'd read her objection. He'd read it twice. His jaw had done the thing, that small involuntary clench at the hinge that she could see from across a room. Then he'd issued Decree 2. Horses, no riding. She'd filed a counter-objection, noting that she hadn't ridden a horse in 11 weeks, making the decree functionally redundant, and requesting clarification on whether the prohibition extended to looking at horses, being near horses, or merely thinking about them in a favorable light. He had not found this funny. Decree 3. Ladders. She had asked, in her formal objection, when he imagined she had last climbed a ladder, and whether this decree should be interpreted as evidence that the Alpha King believed his queen to be secretly ascending ladders under cover of darkness. She had included a diagram. Decree 4. Rapid changes in altitude, including hills. She had requested a geological definition of hill as distinct from gentle slope, and asked whether the South Garden, which had a gradient of approximately 4 degrees, now constituted a restricted zone. Decree 5. Lifting objects exceeding the weight of a standard table setting. She'd spent a satisfying afternoon calculating the precise weight of a standard table setting, 4 pounds 6 ounces, including the water glass but not the candlestick, and then deliberately lifted a gravy boat that exceeded it by 4 ounces in full view of 2 betas and the kitchen steward. Decree 6 had given her pause. Physical exertion resulting in elevated heart rate. That one had arrived at 3:17 in the morning. The ink was slightly smudged. The handwriting was tighter than usual. She'd held that one for a long time, turning it in her hands, noticing the pressure of the pen on the second paragraph, where the strokes dug deeper into the parchment. And for just a moment, under the irritation and the mounting legal arguments, and the absurdity of a man trying to regulate her heartbeat, she'd thought, he's not sleeping. He's not sleeping, Brittany said, flat, honest. The way Brittany always said the thing Eliza was trying not to look at directly. Brittany was like that, sardonic about everything and honest about everything else, with no gap between the two. If Eliza was the lawyer, Brittany was the witness who wouldn't stop telling the truth on the stand, even when the truth was inconvenient. Brittany didn't raise her voice. Brittany didn't panic. Brittany just said the thing, and then waited for Eliza to catch up. "He's not sleeping," Brittany said again. "And neither is Adrian." She didn't look at it directly. She went back to her objections. She picked up a fresh sheet of paper. The baby kicked. Not gently, the way babies kick in stories, but with the specific, blunt force of a foot hitting a bladder from the inside. Eliza winced, rested one hand on the curve of her belly, and started writing with the other. "Formal objection, filed by Queen Nora Dunmore, re. Royal Decree No. 7, Weather Prohibition. I respectfully object to the above decree on the following grounds. 1. The term ambient weather conditions lacks legal definition within the existing Charter of the Nine Reaches. Until such definition is established by council vote, the decree is unenforceable. 2. The threshold of 62 degrees appears to have been selected arbitrarily. I request the scientific basis for this figure, including any consultation with the palace healer. 3. The inclusion of overcast mornings suggests a prohibition on cloud cover, which falls outside the Crown's jurisdiction. She paused, considered, added a footnote of her own. 4. I would also note that the Queen is not, in fact, made of paper. She folded the objection, sealed it with wax, and handed it to the beta waiting in the corridor. He took it the way he always took them, with the expression of a man who loved his king, respected his queen, and wanted very much to be reassigned to border patrol. "Same desk?" he asked. "Same desk." He left. The baby kicked again. Eliza looked down at her belly. "Your father," she said quietly, "has banned weather." "He has," Brittany confirmed. "The man has literally banned weather. Next week, he'll issue a decree about gravity. I want to see you file an objection to gravity." She should have been angry. She'd been angry about Decree 3. The latter's one had felt personal, as if he genuinely believed she was out there scaling the palace walls in her third trimester like some kind of heavily pregnant cat burglar. She'd been furious about Decree 5, the table-setting weight one, because the mathematics of it were so obviously panicked that she'd felt something shift under her anger, something she couldn't file an objection against. But the anger had burned off somewhere around Decree 6, the one about her heartbeat. The one that arrived at 3:17 in the morning. The one she kept in the top drawer of her desk instead of in the folio with the others. She didn't know why 3:17 mattered. She just knew it did. The formal objection reached Damon's desk 40 minutes later. He was already at his desk because he had been at his desk since 4, and before that he'd been at the window, and before that he'd been standing in the corridor outside their bedroom door with his hand flat against the wood, listening to her breathe, counting breaths. He'd stopped counting at 64 because Adrian had started counting along with him, and between the two of them it had become unbearable. He read the objection. He read the footnote. Something in his jaw tightened, and something behind his ribs did a thing he refused to examine. "She's awake," Adrian said. "She's awake, and she's writing, and she's fine. And she's fine, and she's absolutely fine, and can we please just go check on her?" Adrian had been like this for months. Not since the pregnancy, since the confirmation of it, since the moment the healer had said the word, and something in Damon's wolf had rearranged itself at a molecular level around a single new fact. Adrian had always been earnest. Adrian had always been sincere, in a way that bordered on the pathological. The kind of wolf who took everything literally and believed everything completely, and had never once, in 28 years, said anything he didn't mean with his entire body. But now Adrian was urgent. Not the theatrical kind. Adrian wasn't performing. Adrian genuinely, wholly, in every fiber of his wolf mind, believed that stairs were dangerous, that weather was unpredictable, that gravy boats were a legitimate structural hazard to a pregnant woman, and that if they could just identify enough threats and ban enough threats and write enough decrees about enough threats, then the math would work. Then the numbers would add up. Then the thing that couldn't happen would stay a thing that couldn't happen. The stairs, Adrian said. She took the stairs yesterday, the east stairs. The ones with the narrow tread and the loose banister on the left side, and the slightly uneven 7th step and… Adrian, I am simply noting that the eastern staircase has a 17-degree pitch and insufficient lighting in the lower third, and she took it quickly, Damon, she took it at pace. She is allowed to take the stairs. At pace. Damon put her objection on the pile. There were 6 others. She'd numbered them. She'd cross-referenced them. The objection to Decree 4 had included a topographical survey of the South Garden and a table of contents. He'd read every word. He'd read every word of every objection she'd ever written, not because they required a response, but because they were her, precise and funny and alive and so completely, fearlessly present in the world that it made something in his chest feel like it was being compressed in a vice. He should stop issuing the decrees. He knew this. The part of him that governed 9 territories, that held council sessions with 30 advisors, that had navigated 2 border disputes and a trade war without raising his voice. That part knew the decrees were irrational. He could see the pattern from the outside with perfect clarity. A man writing increasingly specific rules about weather and ladders and gravy boats because the thing he was actually afraid of didn't fit on parchment. He picked up his pen. By royal decree of the Alpha King, Decree number 8. The Queen is hereby prohibited from… He stopped, stared at the page, put the pen down. His hands were fists on the desk. He noticed this the way he always noticed it. Too late, after the fact, once his knuckles were already white and the scar on his right hand was pulled tight. He uncurled them, deliberately, 1 finger at a time, the way he'd taught himself years ago. She's fine, Adrian said, quieter now, gentler, the earnestness turning inward. She's fine, she's fine, she's absolutely fine. Adrian said it the way he said everything, with absolute conviction and not a shred of evidence. Adrian believed it because Adrian needed to believe it, because the alternative lived in a room in the back of Damon's skull that had been locked for 28 years. And Adrian could not go in that room, and neither could Damon, and so they stayed out here, in the decrees, in the parchment, in the formal governance of weather and altitude and table settings. Because governance was a language they knew, and the room was a language they didn't. He picked up the pen again. What about birds? Adrian said. What? Birds. She feeds the birds on the balcony. Have we addressed birds? They carry diseases. They have claws. What if one of them lands on her? I am not banning birds. I'm not saying ban all birds, just the aggressive ones, the pigeons. The pigeons have an attitude. I am not writing a decree about pigeons. Fine, fine. But when a pigeon causes an incident… Damon closed his eyes, opened them, wrote, Decree number 8. The Queen is hereby prohibited from unaccompanied visits to the lower palace, including the kitchens, storerooms, and healers' quarters. He paused, read it back, added a footnote. This is not a reflection on the Queen's capability. It is a reflection on the infrastructure of the lower palace, which has not been assessed for… He stopped writing, put the pen down, put his head in his hands. It's fine, Adrian said. We're fine. She's fine. The decree is reasonable. We're being reasonable. Stairs are lethal. Weather is unpredictable. Gravy boats are a clear and present danger to the structural integrity of our… Adrian, please. Adrian went quiet. Not silent. Adrian couldn't do silent. But quiet. which for Adrian was practically a miracle. Damon sat in the thin gray light of 5 in the morning with his hands over his face and his wolf humming underneath him like a wire pulled too tight, and did not think about the thing he never thought about. Chapter 2. The Counter Decree. The stack on Eliza's desk reached 9 by Thursday. She had organized them in a leather folio with colored tab markers, red for decrees concerning physical spaces, blue for activities, green for environmental conditions. The blue section was the thickest. She had also begun including page numbers in her formal objections and was considering adding an index. She was having the time of her life. "You're enjoying this," said Damon from the doorway. She didn't look up from her writing. "I'm performing a civic duty. You're filing a counter decree requesting that I be banned from issuing decrees between 2 and 6 in the morning, on the grounds that decrees issued during those hours demonstrate impaired judgment." She dipped her pen. "I have evidence. Substantial evidence." "What evidence?" She pulled a parchment from the folio without looking. Decree number 9, issued at 3:42 in the morning. The Queen is hereby prohibited from consuming beverages above 160 degrees. You have banned hot tea, Damon. You have made hot tea a matter of royal governance. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that I do not drink tea. I drink water, at room temperature, which you also nearly banned in Decree 7, subsection 3, under ambient conditions. He said nothing. His jaw did the thing. "Additionally," she continued, Decree number 6 banned me from having an elevated heart rate. Walking up a slight incline elevates my heart rate. Seeing you elevates my heart rate. Being near you while you are standing in my doorway with that particular expression on your face definitely elevates my heart rate. By the terms of your own decree, I am prohibited from being in the same room as you." She looked up. "Would you like to revise, or shall I file this?" Something happened to his mouth. Not a smile. Damon didn't do smiles casually, but the ghost of something that in better light might have been mistaken for one. It lasted about a second. He stood in the doorway. She could feel him there the way she always could. Not just the bond, which was a constant low pull between them, a thread that tightened whenever he was close and hummed whenever he wasn't, but the physical fact of him. Damon filled a doorway the way weather filled a valley. You knew it was there before you saw it. She could smell him from here. Cedar smoke and iron. It was sharper today, the way it got when he hadn't slept. There was a thread of something underneath, something tight and metallic that she'd started noticing in the last few weeks. Like a door that had been locked too long. Like a room no one entered. "Don't," Brittany said. She didn't. She kept writing. He came into the room. She tracked him without looking up. The sound of his boots on stone, the slight shift in the air current, the way the candlelight bent when someone that large moved through it. He stopped behind her chair. Close, not touching. Close enough that the heat of him was on her back, and the cedar smoke and iron was everywhere, and the baby turned, the way the baby always turned, orienting toward his side of any room, like a compass finding north. "Your footnote," he said. "About not being made of paper." A factual observation. It was insubordinate. It was accurate. Paper tears. I don't. He was looking at her objections. She could feel the weight of his attention on the folio, reading the tabs, the page numbers, the cross-references. His face was the composed thing it always was in daylight, the political mask, the one that gave nothing to council members or ambassadors or anyone who wasn't looking very carefully at the muscle at the hinge of his jaw. But she was looking carefully. She was always looking carefully, and what she saw was not composure. It was the expression of a man watching someone dismantle his careful architecture, brick by brick, and he couldn't decide whether he was furious or grateful or something else entirely that he did not have a decree for. "I'd like to propose a compromise," she said. "A compromise. I will accept Decree 4, the one about hills, if you withdraw Decree 7. I haven't climbed a hill in months. It costs me nothing, and I would like to be allowed to experience weather. It's not about weather. Then what is it about? The question hung between them. He looked at her. She looked at him. The room was warm with firelight and the day's last sun through the window, and for a moment, just a moment, his face shifted. Not the managed face, something underneath it. Something that looked like a man standing at the edge of a very high place, looking down at something he couldn't see the bottom of. Then it closed. He straightened. The mask clicked back into place so precisely she could almost hear it. "I'll review the compromise," he said, "through the appropriate channels." "The appropriate channel is me, Damon. I'm the one who filed the objection." "Then I'll review it with you." "You're reviewing it with me right now. I'm right here. I'm the channel." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His jaw clenched, released, clenched again. "She has a point," Adrian said. "She has several points." "She always has several points. This is the problem. The problem is that she is smarter than us, and she knows it, and she also knows about the jurisdictional basis of the lower staircase, and I think we need to regroup and—" "I'll have a response by morning," he said, and turned to leave. He passed behind her chair. Close. Too close. The heat of him grazed her shoulder through the shawl, and she breathed in, cedar smoke and iron, and underneath it that locked door metallic thing. And for half a second, neither of them moved. His hand was at his side, 6 inches from her shoulder, and his fingers twitched. Not a reach, not a touch, just the involuntary contraction of a hand that wanted to land somewhere and had been told not to. She felt it. He knew she felt it. The bond pulled between them like a rope drawn taut, and the baby kicked, and neither of them acknowledged any of it. He left. Eliza watched him go. His shoulders were tight. His hands, she checked because she always checked now, were at his sides, and the fingers were curled inward. Not fists, not yet, but the architecture of fists. "He's afraid," Brittany said. Plain, quiet, the animal truth of it laid out without commentary or softening. "I know. Not of you, not of the baby, of something behind both of you. I know." "Do you?" She didn't answer. She picked up her pen and started drafting the next objection, and her hand was steady, and her breathing was even, and the part of her that had started keeping a separate count, not of the decrees, but of the hours between them, the shrinking intervals, the way they came faster now, always at night, always in his tightest handwriting, always from the room he went to when he thought she was sleeping. That part was paying very close attention. She woke at 2 a.m. She reached across the bed. His side was cold. She found him in his study. He was at the window, not the desk, just standing. The fire had burned to embers. He was doing something with his jaw, a small repetitive movement, clenching and unclenching. And his hands were fists at his sides, and he didn't know she was watching, and his face, for the first time, was not managed at all. It was the face of a man who was drowning, very slowly and very quietly, in his own bedroom. She stood in the doorway for a long time. He didn't turn. Maybe he knew she was there. Wolves always knew. She went back to bed. The sheets smelled like him, cedar smoke and iron, the daytime version, the one that meant warmth and authority and the particular way he held a room. But there was a ghost of the other scent, too, the nighttime one, the locked door one, the one that smelled like metal under pressure. It was in the pillow. It was in the place where his head had been. She lay there and held the shape of his face in the dark. Not the managed version, the one from the study, the one she wasn't supposed to have seen. And Brittany lay alongside her consciousness, very quietly, and said nothing. And the nothing Brittany said was the loudest thing in the room. "He'll tell you," Brittany said eventually, "when he can." What if he can't? Then you'll have to go find it yourself. Eliza stared at the ceiling. The baby shifted. The sheet smelled like cedar smoke and iron, and the faint metallic thread of a door that had been locked for 28 years, and she thought, I will. He came to bed sometime after 4. She felt the mattress shift, felt the careful way he lowered himself beside her, the weight distribution of a man trying to take up as little space as possible, as if the bed were hers and he were borrowing it. She kept her breathing even. She didn't move. His hand found her belly in the dark. Not searching, arriving. The way a hand goes to a doorknob or a pen or the hilt of a sword. Muscle memory. His palm settled against the curve of her, warm and large and very still, and the baby shifted toward the warmth, and his breath caught once, quietly, and then steadied. He fell asleep like that, hand on her belly, fingers spread. She could feel his heartbeat through his palm, slow, finally slow, the heartbeat of a man who had found the one thing that made the counting stop. She covered his hand with hers. He didn't wake. Adrian murmured something beneath the surface of his sleep, not words, just warmth, the sound a wolf makes when the thing it's been guarding is finally under its paw. That's what he can't say, Brittany said quietly. That's the whole thing, right there under his hand. Eliza held his hand against their child and stared at the ceiling, and did not sleep. Chapter 3. The Records. The guard's name was Kyle. He stood in the corner of the healer's quarters with the expression of a man who had drawn the worst assignment in the history of the 9 Reaches and was only now realizing how much worse it could get. Decree 8. Unaccompanied visits to the lower palace now required an escort, which meant that Eliza's 7-month prenatal appointment, the routine kind, the kind involving questions about swelling and sleep and the precise location of a baby's head, was being conducted in the presence of a 23-year-old beta who had been trained in border defense and was visibly unprepared for the word cervix. He's going to faint, Brittany observed. The border guard is going to faint in the healer's quarters because your husband has banned you from medical privacy. I want this on the record. The healer, a steady gray-haired woman named Fleur, who had been delivering babies in this palace for 30 years, glanced at Kyle, glanced at Eliza, and made the decision that healers have been making since the invention of kings. Guard, the corridor, please. Kyle looked at Eliza. Eliza looked at Kyle. The decree says, he started. The decree says unaccompanied. I am accompanying her. You will be in the corridor. If her heart rate elevates beyond the threshold established in Decree 6, I will notify you immediately so that you can file the appropriate report with the Crown. Fleur said this without smiling. Eliza loved her immediately and completely. Kyle left. The door closed. Fleur examined her in competent silence, pressing and measuring, and then said, without looking up, "He's not sleeping." "I know." "Neither are you." "I'm sleeping fine." Fleur looked at her, the look of a woman who had been delivering babies for 30 years and could spot a lie in a heartbeat, literally. "He has been coming here," Fleur said quietly, "at night, checking the supply stocks, asking about emergency protocols, 3 times this month." She paused. "He has never done this before, not in 2 years." Eliza was quiet for a long time. "Everything is normal," Fleur said. "Everything is healthy. The baby is positioned well." She straightened. "I need to prepare the tonic. 5 minutes." She left. Eliza was alone. She wasn't looking for it. That was the thing she kept coming back to later. She wasn't looking for it. She was sitting on the examination table, which was uncomfortable in the specific way that examination tables are always uncomfortable, and she was looking at the shelves. The healer's quarters were old. Glass jars and linen bundles and, on the bottom shelf, a row of leather-bound ledgers. Patient records, going back decades. Dates embossed in faded gold on the spines. She wasn't looking for it, but her eyes found the year. 28 years ago. The year Damon was born. She knew his mother was dead. Everyone knew that much. Queen Neville Bennett, gone at 31. But nobody talked about it. Not the council, not the household staff, not his father, who had been traveling for as long as Eliza had known the family. Always abroad, always diplomatic, always somewhere that wasn't this palace, as if the building itself were a room he couldn't stand to be in. Damon never mentioned her. Not rarely. Never. An absence so complete and so total that it had its own shape in every room, like a piece of furniture everyone walked around without acknowledging. Eliza had memories of Neville from portraits, from passing references. She was kind, she loved the gardens, she had Damon's jaw. But how she died, and why no one spoke of it, and why the old king couldn't stay, that had always been sealed behind the same silence that lived in Damon's study at 3 a.m. The ledger was right there, bottom shelf. Eliza, Brittany. Not sardonic, not fed up. Just her name, said with the weight of someone who could smell what was coming. She pulled the ledger into her lap and opened it. The healer's handwriting was different 28 years ago. A different healer, a different hand, but the same precise medical notation. She turned the pages. March, April, May. Routine entries. Then Reuben. Reuben 14th. Queen Neville, 7 months along. Complications noted. Premature contractions. Healer's note. Recommended restricted activity and close monitoring. The Queen was reported to be in good spirits. Reuben 21st. Contractions resumed. Healer attended through the night. Prince delivered at 3:17 in the morning. Healthy. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. 3:17. Reuben 21st continued. Queen Neville. Hemorrhage following delivery. Healer unable to stanch. All measures taken. All measures failed. Reuben 22nd. Time of death, 4:11 in the morning. Eliza sat very still. The examination room was quiet. Morning light came through the small window and fell across the open ledger and across Eliza's hands, which were resting on the page, and across her belly, which was the size and shape of 7 months along. 7 months along. The same as Neville. In the same palace. Seen by the same healer's office, sleeping beside Neville's son, who had been born at 3:17 in the morning. 3:17, the time on every decree, the time she'd found circled in the margin of Decree 6, the time she hadn't understood until now. Eliza, Brittany said again. Gentle in a way that Brittany almost never was, the way a wolf gets gentle when it knows the person it loves has just walked into something that can't be walked back from. She looked at the dates. She looked at them again. She ran her thumb across the handwriting. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, healthy, born at 3:17. She closed the ledger. She put it back on the shelf exactly where it had been, spine aligned with the others. She sat on the examination table with her hands in her lap, and she looked at the wall, and she did not cry, because crying was not what was happening. What was happening was that every single event of the last 3 months, every decree, every footnote, every parchment slid under the door at 4 in the morning, was rearranging itself into a different picture. The same pieces, a completely different thing. She thought about Decree 1. Stairs. A pregnant woman falling on stairs was a reasonable fear. She dismissed it as overprotective. It was overprotective. But the reason underneath the reason was a woman named Neville, who had been fine, and then had not been fine, and had died in a room very like this one. She thought about Decree 6. Physical exertion resulting in elevated heart rate. 3:17 in the morning. Ink smudged. Pen pressed too hard on the second paragraph. She thought about every decree she'd filed an objection to, every witty footnote, every cross-referenced argument about jurisdictional basis and geological definitions, and the precise weight of a standard table setting. She thought about the gravy boat, 4 pounds 10 ounces, 4 ounces over the limit, and how she'd lifted it in front of the kitchen staff with the triumph of a woman who had won a point. She thought about the diagram she'd included with her objection to Decree 3, the one about ladders, the one that had made her laugh while she was drawing it. She'd been making him laugh. That was what the objections were, not just legal arguments, invitations. Every footnote, every absurd cross-reference, I would also note that the Queen is not made of paper, was her reaching through the formal language and trying to find him on the other side of it. And she'd been succeeding, sometimes, in tiny ways. She'd seen it, the ghost of something at the corner of his mouth, the half-second where the managed face flickered. But she'd been playing a different game. She'd been arguing with his governance. He'd been arguing with his grief. They hadn't been having the same conversation at all. The understanding hit first. Then the fury. 2 years. They had been married for 2 years. He had held her in the dark and kissed her forehead and told her about border disputes and trade negotiations and the 17 ways a council vote could go sideways, and he had never once, not once, said the thing that had shaped every corridor of his life since before he could walk. He had wrapped it in parchment. He had dressed it in governance. He had turned his grief into a regulatory project and aimed it at her body and called it protection, and she had filed witty objections to it because she hadn't known she was arguing with a ghost. "You can be angry," Brittany said. Not gentle now, back to flat, back to honest. The sardonic register returning like a muscle memory. "You should be angry. But you already know that being furious at a man for not knowing how to grieve his mother is a waste of a perfectly good objection. I'm not angry that he's grieving. I'm angry that he has a mouth and words and a wife who would have held him through every second of it, and he chose parchment. And what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to sit in a room with him and make him say it out loud." "Tonight?" "No." She was shaking. Her hands on the examination table were shaking. The fury was real, and the compassion underneath it was real, and they existed in the same body at the same time, and neither one canceled the other. "Tonight I need to be steady. Tomorrow I'll be ready." "The angry version would be satisfying," Brittany said. "But the real version is going to cost more, and that's the one that works." Eliza sat with it. She didn't go to him. Not yet. She needed to sit with it the way you sit with something that changes the shape of every room you've ever been in, which is slowly, and with your fists clenched, and alone. He found her in the library that evening. She was in the window seat with a book she wasn't reading, and when he came in she said simply, "Come sit with me." He sat. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for months, the managed face, the composed eyes, the jaw set in its permanent clench. But she was reading him differently now. She could see the effort in it. The composure wasn't natural. It was built. It was architecture. And the architecture was exhausting, and he had been maintaining it while also writing decrees at 3 a.m, and listening to her breathe through a locked door, and she had not known. She had not known. And the fact that she had not known was going to live in her for a while. Cedar smoke and iron. And underneath it, tonight, something that smelled like grief so old it had become structural, like something load-bearing that nobody was allowed to talk about. "Give me your hand," she said. He gave her his hand. She placed it on her belly, low, where the baby had been kicking all afternoon. They sat there. The baby was still. "Wait," she said. They waited. The evening light came through the library window and fell across them, across his large hand on the curve of her dress, across her fingers resting over his, across the space between them that was full of a thing she now understood and he did not know she understood. The baby kicked. His hand was right there. He felt it, the sharp, specific, undeniable fact of a foot against a palm, and something happened to his face. The architecture fell. Not all at once. It crumbled in stages, the muscles around his eyes first, then his mouth, then his jaw going tight and then loose and then tight again, and his hand pressed against her belly and stayed there, and he did not move it, and he was breathing carefully, very carefully, the breathing of a man holding something large and fragile inside his chest. More, Adrian whispered. Not frenetic, not urgent, not cataloging threats or mapping sightlines or calculating the pitch of staircases, just more. Again, please. She watched him. He was looking at her belly. He was looking at it the way you look at something that is the most precious and the most terrifying thing in the same moment, taking up the same space, and you cannot separate them, and you have been trying to separate them for 7 months, and you can't. She didn't tell him about the records, not yet. She sat with him in the library with his hand on her belly and the baby kicking against his palm, and the evening light going gold through the window, and cedar smoke and iron and warm bread and lavender all mingling in the space between them, the bond pulling them close the way it always pulled them close. And she held the knowledge inside her the way you hold a stone, not heavy yet, not sharp yet, just present, something she would carry until the moment came to set it down. She thought about the folio of formal objections waiting on her desk, 9 documents, numbered, tabbed, cross-referenced, all of them razor-sharp and logically airtight and addressed to the wrong problem. She wasn't going to file another one. She wasn't going to dismantle this next decree with footnotes and topographical surveys and Latin medical terminology. She was going to do something much harder than being right. She was going to stand in a room with him and wait for him to say the thing he had never said. His eyes caught the light. A ring of amber surfaced at the edges of his irises and sank back. Adrian, surfacing and retreating, the wolf right at the surface. She put her hand over his and pressed gently, and his fingers tightened on the curve of her belly. And neither of them said anything. And for a moment, the decrees and the objections and the formal governance of weather and gravy boats and hills fell away, and there were just 2 people sitting in a window with their hands on a life they had made together. And the light was gold, and the baby was kicking, and it was almost enough. Chapter 4. The Thing He Has Never Said. The next decree arrived at 3:45 in the morning. She was awake for it. She'd been awake since 3, lying in the dark, listening to the place beside her where Damon had been until 20 minutes ago, when he'd left the bed with the practiced stealth of a man who had been leaving beds at this hour his entire life. She'd heard the corridor. She'd heard the study door. She'd heard the scratch of a pen. The parchment was slid under the bedroom door. Footsteps retreating. She picked it up. By royal decree of the Alpha King, Decree Number 10, the Queen is hereby prohibited from visiting the healer's quarters without prior notice to the King's office, so that appropriate... She stopped reading. She got dressed. She didn't rush. She put on her shawl and her slippers, and she walked through the dark corridors of the palace with the decree in her hand and the baby low and heavy against her hips, and Brittany padding alongside her consciousness like a steady, warm, unsurprised presence. You know what you're going to say? No. Good. The planned version would be worse. She knocked on his study door. She didn't wait. She opened it. He was at his desk. The fire was burning. He had a pen in his hand and 3 more sheets in front of him, half-written, crossed out, restarted. He was writing decrees the way other men paced. It was the only language he had for the thing that didn't have language. He looked up. He saw her face. He put the pen down. Eliza. I found the midwife's records. 5 words. She said them standing in the doorway with her hand on the frame and her belly between them and the pre-dawn dark behind her. And she watched 5 words do what 10 decrees and 9 formal objections and 3 months of escalating bureaucratic warfare had not done. He stopped. Everything stopped. The pen on the desk, his hands on the desk. The managed face. It didn't fall away this time. It shattered. Not in pieces. In one clean break. The way glass breaks when it's been under too much pressure for too long and someone finally touches it. And underneath the glass was not composure or control or governance or anything he had built. Underneath it was the thing that had been there all along, which was fear. Not the political kind, not the manageable kind. but the kind that lives in the body. The kind that has lived in his body since before he was old enough to understand what it was. Adrian went silent. Not quiet, silent. The frenetic, earnest, stare-mapping, weather-banning, gravy boat calculating wolf who had not shut up for 7 months went absolutely and completely silent. And the silence was so loud that Eliza could feel it in her own chest, the absence of a voice that had been running since Reuben, like a machine trying to outrun its own shadow. "Damon," she said. He didn't answer. His jaw was locked. The muscle at the hinge was standing out under the skin like a cable, and his hands were fists. And this time, he didn't uncurl them. He couldn't. The thing in the room was too large for uncurling. She crossed the room. Not rushing, she pulled the chair from the other side of the desk and sat down across from him, close enough that their knees were nearly touching, and she placed the decree, his latest decree, the one about the healer's quarters, on the desk between them. 7 months along, she said. Complications. Delivered at 3:17 in the morning. His breathing changed, not faster, shallower. The breathing of a man who is keeping something inside his chest from escaping through his mouth. His eyes were fixed on the desk between them, and they were bright and wrong. "You have never told me," she said. "In 2 years. You have never told anyone. Nobody talks about it. My father never. Nobody ever said it out loud. It was the thing that happened, and then everything closed around it. I know. Nobody told me either. I found it myself, in a ledger on a shelf, because you couldn't say it, and your father left the kingdom rather than live in the place where it happened." Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "No one knows you sit in this room at 3:17 every night, writing decrees about stairs, because you are terrified that what happened to her is going to happen to me." Something in his jaw broke. Not the clench, the mechanism holding the clench. His mouth opened and nothing came out. His eyes were dark and wet, and the amber was there, not a flash, but a full ring. Adrian right at the surface, and Adrian was still saying nothing, absolutely nothing. And that nothing was the loudest sound in the room. "Damon." "If I say it," his voice was wrecked. Not loud, not dramatic. Wrecked the way a voice gets when it is being used for something it has never been used for. "If I say it out loud, then it becomes a thing that can happen. It becomes real. It's already real. It's been real your whole life." "I know." "Then say it." He looked at her. She looked at him. The fire cracked and resettled. The sky through the window was the dark blue of the hour between 3:17 and 4:11, the hour he had been sitting in every night for 28 years, the hour that had a shape and a smell and a weight that he had never put into words because words would make it solid, and solid things could crush you. "My mother died," he said. The words sounded like they had been stored in a room with no air, flat and dusty and small. "She died having me. She was 7 months along and there were complications and she delivered. And then she bled. And the healer they couldn't stop it. And she..." His voice broke. Not cracked. Broke. A clean snap, like a bone that had been bending for too long. "And my father left. He just left. He's been leaving ever since. Every diplomatic trip, every trade visit, every year abroad. He's not traveling, Eliza. He's running. Because I'm the thing that..." He stopped. He could not finish the sentence. His hands were shaking. His fists on the desk were shaking. The king who had governed 9 territories without raising his voice was shaking in his chair at 4 in the morning, and his wolf was silent, and his mother had been dead for 28 years, and he had never said this to another living person. Eliza reached across the desk. She put her hands on his fists, not pulling them open, not trying to fix them, just resting there, her fingers over his knuckles, her warmth over his white. "You are not the thing that cost anyone anything," she said. Her voice was steady, not because she wasn't feeling it, but because one of them had to be the steady thing right now, and she was choosing it the way she chose everything, deliberately, with her whole self. You are the thing she made, on purpose, knowing the risk. That is not the same thing. He didn't answer. He couldn't. But his head dropped forward, and his forehead came to rest against their joined hands on the desk, and his shoulders moved in a way that wasn't exactly crying. It was closer to the sound a structure makes when the load-bearing wall finally admits it has been carrying more than it was built for. She stayed. She didn't move. She didn't tell him it would be fine. She couldn't promise that, and they both knew it. And the fact that she didn't promise it, the fact that she sat with the uncertainty instead of papering over it, was the thing that let him believe her about everything else. They sat there for a long time. The fire burned low. The light shifted from dark blue to gray to the first thin gold of dawn. His breathing steadied, his fists under her hands uncurled, not all at once, but slowly, one finger at a time, the way he always did it, except this time he wasn't doing it alone. "Home," Adrian said, the first word in a very long silence. Barely there, not desperate, not frenetic, just home. She stood up. She came around the desk. She put her hands on his face, both sides, thumbs at the hinge of his jaw where the muscle had been locked for months, and she tilted his face up. He looked at her. His eyes were dark and wet and gold at the edges, and completely, entirely open. Not the king, not the managed mode, not the man who governed through architecture and decrees and formal channels, just Damon. A man who had been afraid since Reuben, since before Reuben, since the moment he had been old enough to learn what 317 meant. She kissed him, not hard, not desperate, slow. The kind of kiss that says, "I have seen all of it, and I am still here." His hands came up, open hands, not fists, and one went to the small of her back, and one went to her belly, careful, so careful. And the baby kicked against his palm, and he made a sound against her mouth that was not a word. It was the sound of something letting go of something it had been holding since before it could remember why. The kiss deepened. He pulled her closer, not roughly, not with the precision of control, but with the helpless gravity of a man who had run out of architecture and had only his hands left. She leaned into him, the baby between them, the dawn light filling the room, cedar smoke and iron and warm bread and lavender, all of it merging, the bond pulling taut and then releasing into something that wasn't taut at all, something that was just two people in a room at the end of a very long night. She pulled back, forehead against his, both of them breathing. "I'm going to use the stairs," she said. He almost laughed. It was close. A small, broken, beautiful sound, halfway between relief and ruin. "I know. And I'm going to experience weather." "I know. And if you write another decree at 3 a.m, I am going to file a formal objection and also physically sit on you until you go back to sleep." The laugh came. Small, real. It hurt, clearly, the way the first real thing after a long performance always hurts. His forehead was against hers, and his hands were on her, one on her back, one on the life between them. And Adrian was saying, "Home, home, home," so quietly it was almost just warmth. And Brittany, who had been sardonic and fed up and brutally honest for 3 months, said nothing at all. Just settled. The way a wolf settles when something wrong has finally been named. Chapter 5. The Last Decree. The parchment arrived the next morning at 8:30, which was a new record for lateness and for sanity. Eliza was at her desk. She saw it slide under the door and felt the reflex, the small tightening, the muscle memory of 3 months of escalating warfare. And then the reflex dissolved, because it was 8:30, which meant he had slept, which meant something had shifted in the night that was bigger than parchment. She lifted it from the floor. The seal was different, lighter, pressed without force. By royal decree of the Alpha King. All previous decrees concerning the Queen's activities, mobility, and exposure to environmental conditions are hereby rescinded, effective immediately. The Queen is permitted to use stairs, ride horses, climb ladders, endure weather of any temperature, and lift objects of any weight she sees fit. The King respectfully requests that she hold the banister. Below, in his real handwriting, not the tight controlled script of official decrees, but the one she knew from notes left on her pillow and comments in the margins of her books. I am afraid. I have been afraid since Reuben. I am sorry I built a fortress instead of saying so. She read it 3 times. She pressed the parchment against her belly. Well, Brittany said. And then, after a pause, worth it. Eliza laughed, a real laugh, sudden, warm, arriving before she could shape it into anything polite. She pressed the parchment to her belly so the baby could feel it, which was absurd, which was exactly the kind of thing she did now, which was exactly the kind of thing that made Adrian lose his composure in a way that was no longer about danger, but about the specific, helpless tenderness of a wolf who had run out of things to protect against and had found something better to do with his attention, which was just to love them. She found him in the corridor. He was by the window, and for the first time in months he was not doing anything. Not pacing, not writing, not clenching his jaw or curling his hands or standing with the coiled precision of a man who is holding a very large thing inside a very controlled body. He was just standing. His hands were at his sides and they were open. He was looking out at the morning, clear, cold, well below 62 degrees, the kind of morning that would have generated a decree 12 hours ago. And he was not writing about it. He was just looking at it, the way a man looks at something when he has stopped trying to control it and is just letting it be weather. I got your decree, she said. He turned, he looked at her. His jaw was set but not locked. There was a difference now. Set was how he carried the weight. Locked was how he hid from it. I have a counter-proposal, she said. His mouth did something that was almost a smile. A real one, not the ghost she'd seen once in the library, but something warmer, something tired and open and slightly afraid. Of course you do. I will hold the banister, on the condition that you hold my hand on it. He looked at her. The morning light was on his face and the amber was at the edges of his eyes, steady and warm. Adrian right at the surface. Not frantic, not calculating. Just there. That, he said, is an acceptable compromise. She held out her hand. He took it. His fingers closed around hers. Not a fist, not a grip. A hold. The kind that says, I am not trying to keep you still. I am trying to be near you while you go where you're going. They walked down the corridor together. She held the banister with her left hand. He held her right. The baby was quiet. Adrian was quiet. Brittany was quiet. The morning was cold and clear and below 62 degrees, and they walked through it anyway. The baby came 3 weeks early. A girl, 6 pounds 9 ounces. Born at 11 in the morning, which was not 3:17, which was not 4:11, which was a perfectly ordinary time for a perfectly ordinary miracle. Damon was there. He was there the whole time. His hands were open. When it got hard, and it got hard because it always gets hard, and because Eliza's body was doing something enormous and painful, and she gripped his hand with a strength that would have alarmed him if he'd had room for alarm. But Adrian had taken up all available alarm months ago. He stayed. He didn't write a decree about it. He didn't leave the room. He stayed, and his hands were open, and he breathed with her. And when she swore at him, he took it. And when she apologized, he said, "Don't." And when she squeezed his hand hard enough to make his scar go white, he squeezed back. Adrian said one word over and over, like a heartbeat. Safe, safe, safe. And then, when it was over, when Eliza was holding their daughter and the room smelled like warmth and the beginning of something new, and the morning light was pouring through the window like something that had been waiting to arrive, Adrian said a different word. More. Not frenetic, not demanding. The quiet, stunned, absolutely certain word of a wolf who had spent 28 years bracing for catastrophe and had just watched the opposite happen. Eliza looked up at Damon. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, and his hands were on his knees, and they were open, and his eyes were wet, and his jaw was loose, and he was looking at the baby the way you look at proof. Proof that the worst thing you imagined was real, and that you survived it anyway. "She's going to use the stairs," Eliza said. He laughed. A real laugh. Not broken this time, not painful. Just a laugh. The kind that starts in the chest and arrives without permission and doesn't care who hears it. "I know." "And she's going to experience weather." "I know." "And if you write a single decree about it, I will file a formal objection and she will co-sign." He leaned forward. He pressed his forehead to hers. The baby was warm between them. The morning light came through the window, and it was 11:15, and no one was afraid of the time. "She needs a name," he said. "I have one." "Of course you do." "Reuben." He went still, not the managed still, not the architecture, the still of a man who has just heard someone take the worst month of his life and make it into something that could live. "Reuben," he said. "Reuben," Adrian whispered. Eliza kissed his forehead. The baby, Reuben, made a sound that was not a word yet, but would be. Brittany settled. Adrian settled. The whole room settled into the warm, ordinary, unbearable fact of being alive and together and afraid and doing it anyway. Hold the banister, but hold someone's hand on it.